By 2007, Shu Takumi had become a pretty notable game developer at Capcom. He had created the Ace Attorney series 6 years earlier, which had garnered plenty of praise and had become a fan favorite around the world. However, Takumi was starting to become a bit burnt out on the courtroom drama titles and wanted to try his hand at making something new. Something that took a page out of Ace Attorney's book, but was also fresh and different as well. Rather than lawyers and cross-examinations as its main focus though, this new game featured spirits of the dead and fate-changing scenarios. This title would eventually go on to become Ghost Trick Phantom Detective. In 2004, a young Takumi was wrapping up development on the third chapter of the Ace Attorney trilogy, Trials and Tribulations. He assumed that the series would be finished and had begun brainstorming ideas for when he inevitably moved on to something different after development on his current project was complete. One idea in particular stuck with him, and he started to slowly flesh out the concept, excited to bring this new title to life. However, Capcom wasn't quite ready to let Takumi off the Ace Attorney leash quite yet, and would task him with moving the trilogy from the Game Boy Advance over to Nintendo's popular new handheld, the DS. Takumi obliged, and development proceeded over the course of the next few years. After the trilogy was finally ported, Takumi again started to prepare his new game concept, though once more, Capcom pulled him back for yet another year of development on a brand new Ace Attorney title for the Nintendo DS, Apollo Justice. In 2007, when the title was eventually completed, Takumi had become completely burnt out on making Ace Attorney games, and would finally pull himself away from the series and let director Takashi Yamazaki take the wheel. After nearly half a decade of waiting, development on his new game idea from 2004 would finally commence. During his initial planning, Takumi knew he wanted to make something similar to his beloved Ace Attorney series, a game that was accessible to both hardcore and casual players alike, something that once more let him embrace his love of detective stories and mystery novels. He didn't want to completely copy the series though, and instead aimed for this new title to play very differently than anything he had previously created. He would, however, develop the game in a very similar fashion to how he created Ace Attorney, crafting the title's game system and mechanics long before the story was ever written. Rather than arguing in court and collecting evidence at crime scenes, this new game would revolve around controlling spirits of the dead to manipulate objects and change people's fates. Moving from roughly 8 years of working exclusively on Ace Attorney titles to this new project proved to be tricky and a bit intimidating for Takumi, since the core mechanics of his courtroom-based series had long been established. And this current project would be a brand new IP with very different and unique gameplay. He was incredibly passionate about this new game concept and would shoulder much of the development workload as the title's writer, designer, and director. Hironobu Takashita would act as its producer, and Ace Attorney's original music composer, Masakazu Sugimori, would return once more to Takumi's side and create the game's soundtrack. The project's initial concept was for the player to take control of a spirit that worked as a spy and would be appropriately named Ghost Spy. Later into development though, this idea shifted into something much different. And rather than being a spy, the player would take control of a ghost trying to regain his memories that could manipulate objects in the real world. The team settled on the new title Ghost Trick, since the main character would perform quote-unquote tricks to possess and manipulate the environment around him. The Japanese word for to possess, presumably toritsuku, sounded very similar to the English word trick, or toriku as it would be said in Japan, which also influenced the team's decision on this new title and acted as somewhat of a cross-language pun. Ghost Trick would still remain in the same adventure game genre as Ace Attorney, but with a much bigger focus on timing and strategy. At the start of the game, its main character Sissel awakens in a junkyard next to his own dead body to find that he was murdered and has now become a ghost that can freely move around by jumping from object to object. Sissel has completely lost his memory and is unaware of what happened that night and why he was murdered. He must spend the duration of the game's story searching for leads and clues as to who he was and how things turned out the way they did. Sissel is no ordinary spirit though, and has the ability to move around and affect various physical objects by performing self-described tricks on them. This can include actions like opening a door, pulling a lever, turning on an electrical device, and pushing an object. Sissel must use this power to solve puzzle-like scenarios and affect different situations throughout the game, like preventing a murder or helping someone escape a specific location. His ghost tricks aren't the only ability he has though. Sissel can also interact with a dead character's corpse and travel back to 4 minutes before their death, allowing him to potentially alter their terrible fate. These sequences are often on timers, forcing the player to interact with certain objects using Sissel's ghost tricks at the right time so that the victim's death can hopefully be prevented. Later on in the game, he meets an additional ghost that has a different power, allowing him to swap similar looking objects with each other regardless of their size. The player then has the opportunity to switch back and forth between each ghost's ability, which adds to both the game's strategy and difficulty. While creating these mechanics and gameplay, Takumi felt incredibly challenged when writing out and designing each of the title's 18 chapters. He had to work to keep tensions high and make sure each puzzle's difficulty didn't falter as the game progressed. Throughout the course of the story, Sissel meets a large cast of incredibly unique characters, ranging from the young, dedicated detective Lynn to the cute, innocent Camilla, and the adorable Pomeranian dog Missile to the over-the-top detective Cabanella. Funnily enough, Missile was actually based on Takumi's real-life Pomeranian dog. Frequently, these characters would meet grim ends and find themselves as the unlucky recipients of a gruesome death. Sissel would then have to go back in time and tamper with the events in the past that led to their death, changing their fate in the present. These characters would often remain alongside Sissel during the puzzle phases to both give hints and often provide some humorous dialogue. This generally helped lighten the mood a bit during some of the game's grimmer death scenes. Throughout development, Takumi went to great lengths to make sure Ghost Trick's story was filled with many well-thought-out plot twists and new developments as the player continued through it. This story was presented very similar to a stage play and would even utilize theater-esque spotlights to emphasize different characters and objects. Many of these characters had very over-the-top movements and dances, which really gave them a unique vibe and helped underline the game's theater-like presentation. Takumi would even bring over these spotlight visuals and erratic character movements into some of his future titles, like the great Ace Attorney spin-off series. When deciding on the game's graphical look, Takumi and his team decided to move away from Ace Attorney's more static pixel art and would instead lean towards using a 3D polygonal style. The title surprisingly wouldn't use any actual polygons though. The characters would all be 2D sprites created from 3D rendered models and fully animated by hand without any type of motion capture. This gave the characters and their movement animations a very unique style that stuck out from other titles at the time, and was somewhat similar to the same method Rare had used when creating Donkey Kong Country's graphics on the Super NES many years ago. The team decided on this graphical direction instead of using actual 3D polygons, since the Nintendo DS's limitations would keep them from looking nearly as impressive and eye-catching as the animated sprites they had created. Development finally concluded on Ghost Trick in 2010, and it would release in Japan on the Nintendo DS in June of that same year. Unlike Ace Attorney, Ghost Trick was planned from the start to be released outside of Japan to a worldwide audience, and its setting and locales were kept much more ambiguous in an attempt to help the game appeal to non-Japanese audiences. It would launch overseas the following year in 2011 under the new title Ghost Trick Phantom Detective. While the title received very positive reviews from critics, this praise sadly did not translate into impressive sales, and it failed to meet Capcom's sales expectations. Ghost Trick would later launch on iOS devices shortly after its initial DS release, but would unfortunately not make its way to any other platforms, most likely due to its poor sales. Takumi said during many interviews after the game's launch that he would be open to doing a sequel for the title, but did not have any plans for one during the original's production. He also commented, most likely in a joking manner, about doing a Ghost Trick Ace Attorney crossover, but this obviously never came to fruition in any form. Ace Attorney's characters themselves never really made any official cameos in Ghost Trick, though one of the police detectives would be wearing Phoenix Wright's signature blue suit and red tie. In 2020, 10 years after Ghost Trick's initial launch date, fans started a petition to Capcom for a re-release of the game on modern devices and received over 2,000 signatures, though it's unclear whether this rally will ever amount to anything in the future. Ghost Trick didn't find quite enough success to gain many video game cameos unlike other Capcom franchises, but both Sissel and Missile appeared as collectible cards in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3's Heroes and Heralds mode. One of Phoenix Wright's alternate costumes was also modeled after Sissel in the game. He and Lynn would later make appearances in the mobile title Street Fighter Cross All Capcom, and then Sissel himself would make a cameo as a costume in Dead Rising 4's Capcom Heroes DLC pack. While there weren't a ton of Ghost Trick cameo appearances, Capcom at least tried to show the game and its characters a little love over the years. Ghost Trick was a special game that sadly never garnered the same popularity and recognition that its distant cousin Ace Attorney did. Shu Takumi poured everything he had into the title, crafting an incredibly clever and thought-provoking story alongside an amazing cast of characters and some very unique puzzles and gameplay. Hopefully in the future, the game will be more accessible on different platforms, and new people will be able to finally play this intriguing and well-designed experience. Ghost Trick deserved better, but it still remains a niche classic in Capcom's vast gaming library. Hey, thanks for watching. I have a little bit of a venue change because my office is a bit of a wreck, so I'm shooting this in my living room right now. But I hope you enjoyed this short little documentary on Ghost Trick. It is an amazing game. I cannot recommend it highly enough. I like it probably more than a lot of the Ace Attorney series, honestly, in terms of like at least story. But the game is great. It is a crime that it didn't get more attention, honestly. And I really hope more people will play it. I hope this video helps at least a couple people discover the game and give it a shot. Initially, this was supposed to be a part of my History of Ace Attorney video, but the series aren't too related outside of Shu Takumi being the creator of each. So I really wanted to cover Ghost Trick, so I just decided to do this as kind of like a spin-off video as its own little thing. If you're interested in checking the game out, I recommend the DS version first and foremost, but it's a little pricey these days, so maybe go with iOS, which is a bit more accessible and cheaper. But yeah, check it out. Let me know if you like it. Let me know if you've already played it and if you enjoyed it, if you think it's as good as the Ace Attorney series. I'd love to know. I love to talk about this game. It's been a favorite of mine for a long time. And once more, I hope you enjoyed the video and more to come. Thanks a lot. Bye.